Welcome, everybody, to a special post-game edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and yes, the season is over. The New York Giants, 3 wins, 14 losses. Today, 17-10, the 12th straight loss here at Lincoln Financial Field to their rival. I guess you can call them the rivals. Eagles have certainly had the better of the Giants in recent memory. And so the season is over, and now the waiting game begins. So let's get into all of it. Really not much game action today to really talk about in terms of this team and what happened on the field today between the Giants and Eagles. The Eagles obviously had most of their starters out, most of their regulars out. Now, they had some guys in there. Dallas Goedert came back from IR, had a big first half. He ended up not playing after that. They had some guys on the defensive side of the ball. I believe Jordan Davis played a while. So that's where you're at this point. Malik Neighbors, the best overall story for the Giants this season, and he finishes with 109 catches, which breaks Steve Smith's franchise record for most receptions in a single season. That's not just rookies, that's any player. So no player in the history of the Giants has had more catches in a single season than Malik Neighbors this year. 109. He had 1,204 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns, including a touchdown today of 45 yards, in which he just tightrope down the right sideline inside the 10, dove for the pylon, and ended up scoring the only touchdown for the Giants today. Wan'Dale Robinson had 10 catches today. Deontay Johnson with 9 tackles in his, believe it or not, NFL debut for the young linebacker out of Toledo. He got an opportunity today. Kayvon Thibodeau had a sack and a half. So he had 2.5 sacks over the last 2 games. Big decision for Thibodeau coming up in the offseason. We'll get to that in a second. Not a decision for Thibodeau, but about Thibodeau by the Giants. But let's stop burying the lead. The fates of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, based on what I'm hearing, my gut feeling, look, what happened in 2021 with Joe Judge gives me pause to not only not buy into reports from others in terms of who is safe and who is in jeopardy, and trust my instincts and trust what I'm hearing. Now, things can change behind the scenes. I believe Joe Schoen will be back as general manager. I believe Brian Daboll will be back as head coach. I think it's the right call. I've told you that. I've been consistent since the day after Thanksgiving. You listen to this show. Some of you will scream and yell at me and make personal attacks. Some of you will send me emails privately and agree with me. And that's just the way it is. And if I'm doing the job that I believe I do, I'm going to get both sides. I'm going to get people who say I hate the Giants and get people I love Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll and everything else that comes with it. The bottom line is I've covered this team. I've seen the missteps. I've seen the quick trigger from John Mara and Steve Tisch. So I go back to 2021 and leaving the field, leaving the stadium in Joe Judge's final game. There were reports, national reports. Adam Schefter reported Joe Judge was safe. I was told by people that I trust, my sources, that was not necessarily the case, that John Mara and Steve Tisch were still going to meet with Joe Judge, that there were still determinations to be made. Remember, they did not have to fire Dave Gettleman because he retired that final game. So they already had the GM search on. My instincts tell me that when the dust settles over the next 48 hours or so, Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll will be back for a 4th year. That it will be a commitment from ownership that now that these last 2 seasons have happened, they are now ready to build and build forward, and that they are on the precipice of actually putting a lot of this in the past. Whether you believe that or not, it doesn't matter if I believe it, doesn't matter if you believe it, it matters if John Mara and Steve Tisch believe it. And I think they believe, and they've seen what has changed behind the scenes in their structure of their personnel department, how they do things in the draft. I think the 2024 draft is definitely one of those things that they can look at and say they really hit a home run with the guys. Look at Neighbors. We've seen what Tyrone Tracy has done as a 5th-round pick. We've also seen what Drew Phillips has done, Tyler Nubin before his injury, Theo Johnson before his injury, and lo and behold, Darius Musow, as a 6th-round pick, has actually shown that he might be a foundational piece here. And we're not talking a star. We're not talking a Pro Bowler. They're still searching for those guys, for players that they have to develop into that level. But you got to remember here, and I know, you're thinking right now, all right, here's Art again. He's going to report and say what John Mara wants him to say, or what Joe Schoen wants him to say, or Brian Dable wants me to say. The reality is, I'm telling you because this is what I see and what I believe, not because anyone is telling me to say this stuff. And there will always be those who see it as you're either for the Giants or against the Giants. And if you're for the Giants, you're spewing things from PR and from ownership and from the coach. And if you're against the Giants, if you believe it, it's you're the only true reporter that's out there because you are being adamant about how bad they are. And I've had this argument over the last couple of years, especially that when you're middle ground in today's media and you are covering a team, it's not as simple as you are either for them or against them. You are in the middle. And I've got to find a way to stay in the middle. And I will have my opinions on either side. I am not pressured to protect my access. My work and my reputation protect my access. My involvement in the PFWA, the Pro Football Writers Association, that of America, that protects my access. I am a reporter. John Mara does not pay my paycheck. I work for NorthJersey.com, USA Today, and the Bergen Record. That's my employer. So all this other stuff, hey, I could take criticism. That's fine. You don't want to keep it. You don't keep it personal. You want to criticize my coverage. That's perfectly fine. The reality is, I was there in 2021. I was told by several people that I trust in this organization, sources that I have built because of who I am and because of how I do this job, that said, pump the brakes. It's not done yet. And then on Tuesday night, I remember dragging the garbage pails in my driveway out to the curb, the only time I walked out of the house, and I got the alert and the text that Joe Judge was fired. So anyone who's saying that they know right now what is happening, you're lying. You're lying, or you're running with a story that is not 100% accurate. Now, that could change very quickly. My understanding is that here's how the next day and a half is going to go. Tomorrow, 8 a.m., Brian Dable told us in the post-game press conference, team meeting for the Giants, 8 a.m. at the facility. After that, they will break up. They will have exit meetings. They will have their positional meetings in terms of when you have free agents, you have guys coming back on their contract. The way they divide that up, that's the way they'll divide that up. But then after that, my understanding is that that is when Joe Schoen will meet with ownership, Brian Dable will meet with ownership. I don't have a specific time. That could happen in the afternoon. It could happen immediately after the team meeting. A lot of it depends on the schedule for ownership and the way things play out. But you could go into Monday night or Tuesday before we actually have a guarantee of what's happening. And do I expect both to be back? I do. I leave here tonight in Philadelphia believing that Brian Dable and Joe Schoen will get a fourth year. Do I know that for a fact? No, I don't. I don't know that. I can't report that because I do know that things can change when ownership meets with Brian Dable and Joe Schoen. Do I believe that they will fight for their job? Do I believe that Dable has probably more of a fight than Schoen does? Probably, just because of the organizational impact of what the GM represents and what the head coach represents. And you could say the GM dips into several different departments, whereas the coach, even though he is involved in personnel, it's really the coach and the coaching staff. And that's kind of the way things go. So, what do I think happens? You look in New England. Just last week, Gerard Mayo was essentially given a vote of confidence by everybody. They're not going to make a change. The Patriots go out today. They blow the number one pick. So now back-to-back weeks, the Giants give up the number one pick. The Patriots give up the number one pick by winning. And then the Crafts announced that Gerard Mayo is fired in New England. So what does that mean? Can things change with the Giants? Sure. I have seen people report the idea of John Mara can't be guaranteed. And look, it's always going to be Mara and Tisch because they're chosen by their respective families to basically be the ones that are in charge and making the final decisions. But there are members of the family that are involved. I'm sure they take input. But in terms of why it's Mara and Tisch, that's why. So a decision is not made without Steve Tisch being involved in some way, shape, or form. But the on-the-site football decisions are made by John Mara and the team around him. And that's the reality. And do I believe that they are confident of going into another coaching search? When you see the coaching candidates that are out there, and let's not forget, just a couple of years ago, Brian Dable was Ben Johnson in Detroit. Yeah, we forget. Yes, Ben Johnson may turn out to be an outstanding coach, a head coach. But right now, he is an outstanding, creative offensive coordinator who happens to have some pretty damn good talent in Detroit. And everything is clicking on all cylinders. But that may not be the case if he takes another job and doesn't have a quarterback. And I'm just using Ben Johnson as an opportunity for, the reality of what the situation is. So that's where I'm at with the coaching search. Now, could the Giants, if the Giants move on from Dable? Now I have this file, here's part of the job. Here's like the inside baseball, inside football, how the sausage is made. We've got to prepare for all these things. So you have to pre-write stories. If Dable is fired, what's next for the Giants? A list of coaching candidates. I personally don't like putting out coaching candidates while a person still has a job. And I don't know for sure if that person is being fired or that person is being retained. It's hard to do that. We do that enough with players of who's next. And that's kind of the way things break down. But the player you can almost assess and say, okay, you need a better quarterback. That's the way things are. That kind of thing. And the Giants need another quarterback. They need a franchise quarterback. Will they get that in a draft? I'm not sure. Oh, by the way, they are picking third in the 2025 NFL draft. The Patriots winning allows the Titans to take over the top spot by losing today. Cleveland Browns are number 2. New York Giants are number 3. The reason why the Browns are ahead of the Giants is essentially strength of schedule. Even though it worked in Cleveland's favor, the Giants beat the Browns earlier in this year. So the Browns are going to be ahead of the Giants. That's the way it happened. So you want to know why the Giants are number 2? Go all the way back to week 3 of the season when the Giants were 0-2 and they desperately needed to win a game. And they went to Cleveland and they beat the Browns. And I guarantee you, everyone who's watching right now celebrated when they won that game in Cleveland. So don't give me this idea of tanking and they ruined everything last week. It's not the same. It's like the final play in a game. Yes, there's pressure involved. But when coaches and players say it wasn't just that play. It was the play that happened in the first quarter that also affected the result. The win that the Giants had beating the Browns in September affected where they're picking right now and affected why they're not number one. That's why tanking is not a great thing. That's why tankathon is not a great thing. And that's why the NFL would be best served to go to a lottery the way the NBA does. But that's not the case right now. So that's where we're at as far as the draft pick. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that. Let's get this front office thing settled. So I mentioned candidates. It's hard for me to think that the Giants, if they move on from Brian Daboll, that they would go for another coordinator. Now, where could it be? Who could they go get? I'll give you three names that I could see if the Giants were moving on from Daboll that they could turn to. Number one, Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame. You see what he's doing. He's got the team. He's got the Irish 2 wins from a national championship. He's a guy that I could see John Mara seeing and saying, you know what, that guy could be my guy for 15 years. Again, it's a crapshoot. It's a leap of faith. It's seeing somebody and saying, really? Really, that guy can do it? You don't know. You have no idea. I know there'll be a buyout for Freeman if he were to take an NFL job. Reportedly, Pete Thamel from ESPN had it right under $4 million as a buyout, so it would be pretty costly. But Freeman would be somebody that I could see fitting in with what the Giants want as like that CEO coach that would energize the fan base, would kind of give a facelift to what they have. That's number one. Number two would be, if you're looking at it, Brian Flores was the runner-up when Brian Daboll got the job. We all know about the text from Bill Belichick. Congrats, Brian. And he sent it to the wrong Brian and went to Flores, not to Daboll. I hear you're getting the job, that kind of thing. We all know the lawsuit that Brian Flores has filed against the NFL for bias, and the Giants are included in that. But I can tell you this. That Friday when Brian Daboll got the job, before they made the final decision, the 2 finalists were Daboll and Flores. And there were people in the Giants organization who liked Brian Flores. And it was touch and go. And I can tell you this, there were 2 press releases that were going to be established that day. 1, Brian Daboll is the new head coach of the Giants. 2, Brian Flores, the new head coach of the Giants. They needed to be prepared. Now, does that mean anything? It's up to you. But I can tell you that was the case. That's how close to Brian Flores was to being the head coach of the Giants. So if Brian Daboll is fired, Brian Flores is somebody that I think you should consider. Now, I don't know if the Giants have completely abandoned that idea after what happened with the lawsuit and everything else. That's either here nor there. But I can tell you that he was very close and strongly considered to be the head coach when Daboll got the job in 2022. Now, the third one is a little bit of a Hail Mary on my part, but I could see it. I really could. And that is, ready for this? Nick Saban. 73 years old. I get the age. Why would Saban want to come back to the NFL? He wasn't successful in his stint in Miami. It didn't work. But I can tell you this. John Mara has said repeatedly, most recently I heard it from John Mara when Joe Judge was hired, is that Nick Saban was the best coaching interview he's ever been a part of. The Giants love Nick Saban. If you think back to Hard Knocks, when Brian Daboll has a good relationship with Nick Saban, so there may be a little thing there that might not 100% work. But Daboll said the 2 guys that Nick Saban said about drafting were Malik Neighbors and Brock Bowers. Well, the Giants ended up with Malik Neighbors, and sure as hell, Brock Bowers is having an awesome year as well. If it wasn't for Jaden Daniels, probably the offensive rookie of the year in the NFL. Probably not even probably. I'd say without Daniels, Bowers would be the rookie of the year. So those are 3 names that I would consider. I think, the Giants have already established that it's a small window anyway for their coaching regimes. So if you can get a Nick Saban to come in here, he'd be a culture changer, that's for sure. You'd gain a lot of respect. Who can argue with Nick Saban? That would be one of those things that I'd say, you know what, I don't even know if Saban would want to get back into coaching. He's undefeated right now as an ESPN analyst. But that would be one that I would see. It would have to be with structure, everything else. Beyond that, I think Mike Vrabel goes back to New England, and that's kind of where we're at. So, again, I think Brian Daboll is back as head coach, so all of this is moot. But I wanted to bring it out on the podcast to just kind of put it out there just in case it does come down the pike. You heard it here first. Those would be three of my top candidates, in addition to all the other names that you've heard. And if that's where it goes, then that's where it goes. All right, let's go to some questions from the guys at K12. Eric Stianson, my guy, constantly chiming in. Is this the worst season in the Super Bowl era for the Giants, and any chance the Giants do not pick up Kayvon's fifth-year option, which has to be done in May? I don't know if you could say this is the worst season. I felt as though there were several seasons during this run, during this decade of despair, which is what I called it, that they were worse. They felt worse, even though the record says differently. I don't think this was the worst season. Was it one of the worst? Well, they lost 14 games for the first time in franchise history. So, you know, the idea that you've had the combination of the 100th year celebration and such a bad season, that obviously makes it feel worse. But let's be honest, the last 11 years, the Giants, every time the Giants have tried to celebrate something, they've fallen flat on their face. Games at home where they have halftime celebrations, the celebration of the 2007 team, of the 2011 team, they get blown out. I mean, it's all a product of everything. So I don't know. I can't say for sure it's the worst. I know some fans have said that. I know by the numbers it may be considered the worst, but I got to imagine that there were other seasons. Certainly Pat Shurmur's second season, Ben McAdoo's second season was terrible. I mean, people forget about the Eli thing and everything that happened, but, you know, I mean, McAdoo had two players not come back after the bye week. You had a player that left midday, DRC left the building and ended up getting fined and suspended. I mean, you know, you didn't hear any of that stuff. So as much as the losing mattered, I think that's kind of where I fall. So one of, I don't know if the one. All right. Tony wants to know about certainly changes, about Daboll and Shane are safe. I agree. Will Daboll be forced to bring in new coordinators? You know, look, if Mike Vrabel gets a job, he may take Shane Bowen or want to take Shane Bowen to be his defensive coordinator somewhere. So wherever Vrabel goes. If that happens, then the Giants would have to look for a new defensive coordinator. Now, I think it'd be very difficult to move on yet again, yet still retain Andre Patterson and Jerome Henderson, guys who you respect and you wanted here and gave a shot. So the construction of the staff will be TBD, and you don't want to lose guys. As far as offensive coordinator, if Mike Kafka leaves, does Daboll still call plays? Is this Shea Tierney's opportunity to step up and become the play caller? I'm not really sure. First things first, let's see if Daboll comes back as head coach and then move on from there. So we'll address that once we get the official news about Daboll, whether he stays or goes. Also, now this is from producer Paul Wood. Thoughts on if the Titans and Browns take the projected top two quarterbacks, do the Giants take Travis Hunter to team with Neighbors and Tracy, with Wandell, or Will Johnson at corner, Mason Graham from Michigan? Don't forget the pass rusher, Carter from Penn State. That's somebody else. And then take a bridge QB that Paul mentions. Paul, you're all over with this question. Trade back, maybe try to get Jalen Milroe. You know, the idea of waiting, try to get Arch as a quarterback. Look, let's talk the top three right now. Face value, everyone's like, oh, well, Tennessee and Cleveland are going to take quarterbacks, so the Giants are just going to have to take whoever's left. I'm not sold that the Browns take a quarterback. I think that Myles Garrett is putting pressure on that organization about wanting to be traded or wanting a commitment to a quarterback. Look, if they love a quarterback, they may take the second quarterback, whether it's Shador or Cam. But I think one of those quarterbacks is going to be sitting there for the Giants at 3, or there will be a trade involved. I could see Cleveland taking Travis Hunter, just the way things may fall out. So let's see where that goes. As far as the Giants not taking a quarterback, I think Milroe is certainly somebody to look at. Jackson Dart from Ole Miss, that would probably be later in the first round. So what do they do? Do they move up? If they're not moving off of 3, do they move up from the second round and try to get into the first, the back end of the first to take a quarterback? Maybe that happens. Bridge quarterback, I'm not really sure what option there is. Maybe Justin Fields shakes free. I don't see Sam Darnold leaving. I am not buying the J.J. McCarthy trade stuff in Minnesota. There's no reason to get rid of J.J. McCarthy, and now he's had 2 knee surgeries that I've mentioned. He hasn't taken a snap in the NFL. Minnesota would be best served to hold on to him, because what if Sam Darnold turns out to be an 11th hour and midnight strikes and he's Cinderella and they turn into a pumpkin, and then all of a sudden you have no quarterback that you just drafted in the first round. So I don't think J.J. McCarthy will be an option either. So I agree with you, Paul. I don't see the waiting for Arch Manning. I don't think that's happening. So I'm not really sure what the medium Pepsis are and that Paul tweeted, but that texted me. But yeah, medium Pepsis. Well, nobody's getting medium Pepsis right now. That's just the way it is. It is what it is. So Cleveland did restructure Deshaun Watson. We'll see what they do. I think Kirk Cousins is an option there, especially if Kirk Cousins is on the cheap coming out of Atlanta. Maybe Kirk Cousins becomes an option here if they decide to go to the bridge. But Kirk Cousins did not inspire many people with the way he's been playing down in Atlanta. There's a reason why he's on the bench. So that's kind of where we're at. So that's it. I don't think I missed anything. This was our post-game podcast. The season is over. We will be back with an emergency podcast as soon as we get the breaking news. So make sure you follow me on northjersey.com and on all social media, art_Stapleton. And we will be back with an all-in as soon as we get the news about Brian Dable and Joe Shane. And then we will look forward to the draft, the combine, the owners' meetings in March, and everything else that comes off of that. So yet again, the offseason will force the regular season to take a back seat in covering the New York Giants. But as always, we are all in. I want to thank you for being all in, not just today, but this entire season. Thank all of you who stick by me. Thank all of you who criticize me and force me to examine my coverage and to get better every day and commit to giving you the best product that you can get without agenda, regardless of what you think. Again, I am doing this for my employer and for myself and for my reputation. And if you don't think that matters to me, well, you should be following me on social media to see when somebody crosses me on that and how that feels and how that makes me react. So I see a lot of people saying that I've changed and I've only become more aggressive and adamant in what I do and who I am and what I stand for in covering this team and running this podcast and who I am for myself and my family and this job. So if you don't believe me and you don't buy into what I have to say, there are other podcasts, there are other beat reporters who I respect, who I am colleagues with and peers with. You can go follow them and they'll give you what you want. Like I said, this beat is like Baskin and Robbins. You got plenty of flavors to choose from. If you don't like this flavor, that's fine. But I am mint chocolate chip. I am not changing. I will adjust. I will evolve, but I am not lowering my standard for what I think that might get me more attention or more views or less criticism. I am covering the Giants the way I believe they need to be covered, and how I see things. And I think the people who appreciate me and appreciate my coverage, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, you're still all in. And I'm all in too. So we'll be back soon. I won't give you a time or a day when the next podcast will be, but Paul and I will be right back there to give you the news when it breaks, as you've come to expect, not only from our podcast, but from everything I do covering the Giants for NorthJersey.com, for USA Today, and for The Record. So for Paul Wood, I'm Art Stapleton. Thanks for tuning in here from Philadelphia. We'll head back up to North Jersey, and tomorrow the waiting game begins. What will John Mara and Steve Tisch do for Joe Shane, for Brian Dable, and to assure that this franchise does not endure another season like they did this year? And I believe the right pieces are in place. They just need to continue to build. It's not done by any stretch. Let them finish the job. Appreciate you being all in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.